Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the Pilot Custom 743. First off, let's back up a little bit. The Pilot Custom 74 was released in 1992. These were made for people in Japan who had at that point become so accustomed to ballpoints that when they would write with a fountain pen, they would impart too much pressure onto the nib. And so the 74 was actually meant to correct this overcompensation due to ballpoint pens. So they designed the Custom 74 with a softer nib for people who are applying too much pressure. So it was a softer nib. That's what made the 74 different. So that was the Custom 74 in 1992. The next year, in 1993, they released the Custom 743. And that one had a larger nib, a size 15 nib. These were all gold nibs, 14 karat gold nibs. So the larger nib on the 743 was what separated that from the Custom 74. Now it should also be noted that these were originally not available in America. These were only to overseas markets. So it only recently in the last year or so became available in the US market from authorized dealers. Otherwise you would have had to get this from a Japanese dealer, which is what I actually did here. But this Custom 74-3 is a beautiful pen. Honestly, guys, this is one of my contenders for top pen. If I had to choose and stick with just one, this is one of the contenders. Let's start first the aesthetics, okay? So the aesthetics are kind of old school. They're kind of emulating that kind of classic look from the last century almost. And that's okay because these are designed to be a classy pen, right? So it's almost bordering on oversized. It's a big pen, but it's not oversized. It's definitely big, but it still fulfills that kind of standard girth rule. So let's look at the cap first. We've got the engraving right there where it says Pilot. We've got gold plating on, all of the accents on the furniture, we'll call it. And if you look here at the cap too, they also have an engraving there. It says Custom 74-3. And also made in Pilot, made in Japan. The cap is postable. You can post it. However, I usually don't post it because it's long enough without posting it. But the cap is postable, which is nice. It's also got about 1.75 rotation, so about 1 3/4. So it's not cumbersome on and off. I have had no real issues with this drying out, but I do try and use my pens pretty frequently when they're inked up. So the body is 15 grams, the cap's 10 grams for a total of 25 grams. So again, one of the reasons I like to preferably use things unposted. I don't need that extra weight here. The body itself is nice. It's very underspoken. At this price point, you are looking at going all in on the nib. So these bodies are underspoken, usually just plain black. This year they do have a green that is also a variant that's just straight matte green. Instead of black here, but the bodies are underspoken because they're putting that money towards the beautiful, beautiful nib. Before we move to that nib, let's look at the grip real quick. We've got a kind of gold banded accent right there, and the grip tapers. It's not concave, but it tapers down to a flare so your fingers can index themselves. Under the hood, we've got a Con 70. This is one of the benefits of this pen. This is a larger size converter, so this carries more ink, which is great because I got this one with the Falcon Nib. Now, the Falcon Nib is FA. That's why you can see the FA. That's how they abbreviate it in Pilot's nomenclature. And the Falcon Nib, not to be confused with the Pilot Falcon pen, because they do make a Falcon pen with a Falcon Nib, but this is the Falcon Nib on the 743. So they make a variety of different nibs, but the Falcon is their version of a full flex nib. Now this is special because Japanese pens don't often venture into that area. That's kind of a American, even European type thing from cursive writing. So the Japanese tend to write a little bit more precisely. They don't add as many embellishments. And this flex pen, in that same fashion, does not flex quite as far as some others, such as American Vintages or as the Mag 600. But for a Japanese pen, this is as flexy as you get, and this thing is a joy to write with. So one of the things that came up when I was reviewing different thoughts on this pen before I purchased it was that some people were having issues with railroading. Now this is because it came with a plastic feed stock and Japanese writing, and I'm apologizing because I do not know any Japanese writing, but it's almost like a hash mark where it's like shorter strokes mixed with different kind of characteristic symbols here. So it's very different than the kind of continued cursive writing that Westerners are used to. So I heard, because it was designed for this type of writing, that occasionally it would railroad when you would get to this type of writing. So as I ordered this pen, I just went ahead and tried to alleviate any problems before they even happened. And I went ahead and I went to flexiblenibs.com and got a ebonite feed for this. I actually got a red one. They had them in red or black. They also had 3 different variants for this pen. They had a single slit, a double slit, or even a triple slit. So I did the double slit because I wanted to do some flexi writing, but I didn't want to go full wet noodle. And I'm still glad I didn't, because this thing is very juicy and wet, even with the double slit. But that ebonite feed definitely helps. I have not experienced any sort of railroading here. And we'll do another kind of more exaggerated example. Whoa. There we go. And this is larger lined paper. These are not standard lines. I have no railroading. Now, that said, I didn't even attempt the plastic stock feed, because as soon as this came in, I modified it before I even inked it up, because I wanted full max performance right at the gate. But this thing has awesome line variation for a modern pen. Now this is just kind of me writing casually with some flair, like I'm going to do, whoa, there, some flair. If you have no pressure whatsoever, this writes as a fine. You can do very fine writing with this pen if you wish. As you start to flex it, you've got that line variation, right? So that's where, you have to consciously add that effort on your downward pull. Now, when you use a full flex pen, you need to be very conscious with how you apply that flex, because if you're applying the flex and putting a lot of pressure on like a weird cross stroke or, like a diagonal or something like that, that's going to potentially impart damage to the nib. So when you use a flex nib, you really only, so like here, right, I'm going to go there and then down. So you really only want to do it on the downward strokes. Up, no. Down, yes. Down. So you only want to apply that flex on the downward strokes, otherwise you risk misaligning and damaging your nib. But if you are familiar with how to properly use a flex pen, this is awesome. So being as it is a Japanese fine, it is a little bit more toothy at times. It does have a little bit more feedback. And sometimes if I'm not fully on my exact pressure, what that results in is when I do the kind of thinner lines, sometimes that kind of feedback will catch and my smaller line will get like a little wavy. And I kind of did that on purpose, but that kind of emulates what happens to me every now and again, was that little bit of feedback will catch on the paper, and then on a thin wispy line, it'll catch and leave a little inconsistency in my smoothness of my writing. But once you kind of accommodate for that and get used to this pen, that's not an issue typically. I switch between a lot of different pens through the week, and that's just one thing that I notice when I come back to this pen. So as a daily writer, if you were using this often, I don't foresee that necessarily being an issue, because you would have then become accustomed to your pen. So I don't use this in the office often because I don't usually use the flex. That's something I do more for personal writing. And then because this is so juicy, it is more likely to, if jostled about in your pocket, get an extra little drip here or there. When I was moving my hands really rapidly and fast, it was enough to like cause an ink blotch to come out onto the desk. So just something to be aware of. But then again, like I said, this is an aftermarket, super juicy wet feed too. So it does its job, right? And that's when we can go, whoa, and just do tons of flexes. This is one of my top pens. This pen is a beautiful, gorgeous thing, especially with that Falcon Nib. And that's pretty much why I bought this model, was for that Falcon Nib. So again, it's kind of sparing on the body. It's nothing too overly zealous here with their aesthetic. It's just very kind of simplistic. But that could be very classic too, and that's, I think, what they're going for, especially with this kind of clip up here. It almost emulates some Watermans and, you know, this design aesthetic. It's like very early 1900s vintage pen. So the aesthetic is kind of old school, but when you get under the hood here, this gold, 14 karat gold nib, especially the Falcon variant. Now they come in all variants, you know, you can get a fine, medium, etc. But when you get this Falcon nib, that's their flex nib. It brings a whole new world to life with this pen. I did end up getting an aftermarket feed to help feed that extra flexiness, because this pen was designed for Japanese writing, not for Western writing with cursive that had longer flowing lines. It's designed for shorter, stout flexes, so that aftermarket feed really helped kind of bring it into the Western avenue of cursive. And I've had no railroads whatsoever with this aftermarket feed from FlexibleNibs.com. So the balance of it is great. I like the little tapered grip with the flare. It's nice to index your fingers. This thing definitely is long enough to reach the crook of my hand, so I don't have to post it, which is great. And that allows for that extra little control where I don't have the, you know, the extra weight up there. I can control this just that little bit extra. So the nib itself starts off as like a fine nib because it's a flexible nib. So the fact that it is a fine nib on occasion on less than preferred paper might lead to a little bit more feedback and a somewhat toothy feel, unless you're kind of into the flow of this pen and you know what to expect. It does have that gold softness to it, and it was designed to be softer, let alone this one being the flex one. This nib in general was designed to be softer for this pen. So on average writing, I find this just to be a joy. I can do little embellishments when I want. It's something that happens naturally and easily, and you don't have to focus on it. And that's just kind of when you're writing without thought. When you want to put thought into it, you can really put this, like I said, it's like a manual sport car. You can really decide when and where and how to embellish your writing, and that's a really cool thing. I don't think I've mentioned any real cons to this pen, and that's because I really think it is an exemplary of its type. I don't really find too many cons with it. It's a little bit thick here, so when you put it down, you know, it's not, it kind of wobbles on that sense, but that's not really a con to really note unless you're doing size comparisons, which we should do. The Pilot 743 compared to a Pilot Vanishing Point. 743 is a little bit thicker in girth, definitely when you add that cap. And I'm going to go ahead and align them on that side. Here it is next to a Retro 51. So still a little bit girthier and wider than the Retro 51. Here we've got the 3776. The 3776 from Platinum is definitely a little bit shorter, a little bit thinner in girth too. And finally, its biggest competitor, because of that flex nib, here is a Mag 600 from Magna Carta. And the Mag 600 is definitely thicker and stouter. So there we have it, guys. This is a gorgeous pen. This is a great pen, especially with that Falcon nib in particular. It makes this thing its own crazy awesome writing experience. If I had to choose a top 5 list for my pens, the Pilot 743 Custom here would definitely be in it. If I had to choose a top 3 list, I think this pen would be in it. If I had to choose a top 1 pen, if I could only have one, this is one of my top contenders, absolutely. I don't know if it would actually win. I haven't had to, you know, put my pens through the grinder in that manner, but that's how good this pen is. It easily would make my top 3 or 5 and is a contender for my number 1. This thing is beautiful. It's beautiful to write with. It's super, super reliable. I've never had any flow issues, any issues whatsoever between the converter, the flow, the writing. The nib is well tuned. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous pen, and it is well deserving of its price point, even though it is kind of aesthetically a little bit kind of on the plain side with that plain black and gold motif. But that's okay, because what you are getting under the hood definitely takes this pen above and beyond. Thank you for joining this review of the Pilot 743 Custom with the Falcon nib. Stay tuned, we hope to bring you more soon.